wanted to create this film to talk a little bit about some things that aren't getting spoken about, particularly as it relates to how fear affects behavior within people and around this issue of COVID-19 and a flu pandemic, or I guess they don't really call it a flu pandemic, but a health pandemic that is gripping this country, the United States, and other countries, and shutting businesses down and driving a great deal of fear that is causing some definite change in the way that we live our lives. And you got to ask yourself the question is, what does media have to gain as a result of the fear? What do officials have to gain? Public health officials and the government, and then business interests. What do they have to gain by this? And of course, it's obvious that media has something to gain in terms of drawing more people to their network, being able to advertise to more people and being able to drive advertising dollars. Public health officials, they have an agenda. They want to draw money into their systems to support funding and research. And government officials, again, in their estimation, they fall, I would say, somewhere in between, where they do want to drive more support for their cause that they stood up for, the people that are their constituents, and they want to do the right thing. In fact, I generally think that most people have very noble ideals when it comes to wanting to help people in general. And I think that's been going on quite a bit with this whole issue with this pandemic and COVID-19. And then, of course, business interest. Well, that can look both ways. Some business could definitely be doing something for the public to really help them out. Certainly making more of a particular supply that's become in short supply, maybe because of hoarding or maybe unnecessary use, that is thinking about the public in general. But there could also be some underlying interest in trying to drive a market to an area that now is perceived to be needed in a much larger way because of what fear has actually done to create learned behavior within people. Let's talk about fear for a second. What does it do in the body? Well, one of three things. First of all, the majority of the mammals in research, and humans included, will freeze. Sometimes for a few seconds, sometimes for a prolonged period of time. When someone has a panic attack, that's basically a version of freezing. And it's there to help us survive, So if there's a potential threat, person tends to freeze for a moment to assess what just happened. As a pilot, something happens in the airplane that I fly, I may freeze for a moment to take a look at it and assess it, and then determine what do I need to do in order to address this new threat that exists, this thing that might be an emergency or is emerging as a possibility of emergency. The second thing that people do is they flee, they run. They don't want to look back. They want to get away from that danger as soon as possible. And if we look back at freezing and fleeing, we can see how easy it's been to get people, for the most part, to stay at home. Stay at home work order. I'm going to flee from the danger, and I'm going to freeze. I'm going to stay put. I'm going to stay right in my house away from the danger. And I'm going to sit back and I'm going to watch it unfold on the television, on social media, and assess what's my next move. What do I need to do? And again, all noble things to do to protect the neighbor. Stay at home. Don't spread the virus. Let's do the right thing for people. And then the last thing that people do is they fight. Okay, and we think of the fight or flight response, but the freeze part of it is not usually communicated. Fight or flight. Well, fighting is, I'm going to fight back. I'm going to survive no matter what. I'm going to fight with my neighbor if they disagree with me, that they're actually wanting to go out. They're wanting to go back to work. They're wanting to go back and start their business because they're afraid they have no income coming in and what the consequences are going to be down the road. And I'm going to look at them potentially as being selfish for not being willing to sacrifice like I'm sacrificing at home, not working and taking this for the higher good of all. So you have a freezing, fleeing, or fighting. Now, how does this work in the brain and where does it come from? Well, a study that was done in 2014 called Neural Substrates Underlying Fear Evoked Freezing, the Periaqueductal Gray and the Cerebellar Link, helps us to better understand where this occurs in the brain. This area called the periaqueductal gray, or the PAG, has found that there's a part of the brain that sends through a tract or a pathway up to the cerebral cortex, the thinking part of the brain, messages that actually helps give executive order. It was thought for a long time that most of the fight or flight response and a lot of the fear responses were only occurring in a part of the brain called the hindbrain and the amygdala, that these were very reflexive things, that they were not necessarily coordinated, executive ordered thinking processes. But in fact, what this research has shown is that there is a pathway that exists from the PAG to the cerebral cortex through this area called the parasmus. And so how does this work? Well, for example, let's say in your house you hear a strange noise. You think maybe some glass broke, maybe somebody busted a door. Immediately, this area of the brain, the PAG, is going to send a message up to the cortex, through the paramus, and you're going to start to think, what should I do? And there's that kind of that freezing moment, and then there's, what should I do next? And then, from that point, a series of processes are going to unfold so that you can take the right action. Do I go inspect it? Do I get on the phone, call 911, etc.? Well, let's say, for example, you're walking along and somebody that you're walking towards is acting in a very strange way. Again, you're going to stop for a moment and take a look at them. That freezing response. You're going to say, should I continue walking? Should I maybe walk in a different way? Should I do something to protect myself at this point? Or you're in unfamiliar surroundings. You're in an area where you've never been in, a neighborhood you haven't been in. You've gone to a foreign country. People speak an unfamiliar language. They look different than you. There's naturally the desire to protect oneself. There's a shutting down, there's a closing down, and that's there to protect you and keep you alive. Or a viral concern, okay? Concerned about the deaths, concerned about the fact that this is an illness that we don't have a vaccine for, we don't have any treatment for, and there's a scarcity of supplies. There's not enough masks, there's not enough test kits to go around, there's not enough ventilators, there's not enough beds in the hospital. And then, of course, there's the historic pandemics. There's been pandemics in the past where it killed millions of people, and this could be that and worse. And then that idea that there's no known cures, and that if this kills so many people, I might be next, loved ones might be next, and I don't want to die, and I certainly don't want people that I love to die either, especially if it could be prevented with something as simple as staying at home, right? Freezing, staying at home, fleeing. And so it allows us to actually shut down quite easily. And it's really quite remarkable to me when I think about how willing people have been to give up civil liberties that people fought hard for, our Bill of Rights. And some people will argue, this is not a time to be talking about the Bill of Rights. This is not a time to be talking about civil liberties. But I think it actually is, because it's important to use the part of the brain, the cortex part of the brain, to assess what's real and what's not real, and not allowing the fear part to begin to take over. So if we go back and we review this again, one of three things happens with fear. We either freeze, stay in place. Well, that's pretty easy when it comes to stay at home and freezing, and geez, if I only have to do this for a little while and this is going to save lives and I can get back to work, great, okay, seems pretty easy on the surface. Or there's going to be some blood flow to the legs, heart, so that we can flee from the danger. Or lastly, there's going to be adrenaline to fight. And I think that some combination of all three of these are currently happening right now within the general population of the United States, and I'm sure around the world. And as the news begins to come out and people begin to get other sides of the story, it becomes more and more clear perhaps a pathway. So if you're kind of wondering, well, what should I be doing right now? First thing is to assess, are you in a state of fear that is healthy or is it unhealthy? Has it caused you to go to a state of just freezing and not doing anything? Maybe a state of fleeing? Or are you in a state of fighting? And ultimately, as I said, a lot of this research is done so that they can understand how to help people with panic attacks, help people that have phobias, and help people that are struggling with fear. But it certainly is very apropos when it comes to what does the media have to gain? What do officials have to gain? And what business interests have to gain? And we should be really asking ourselves, is this fear attempting to manipulate my emotions, manipulate my behavior so that I will have a conditioned response the next time that this perceived fear comes back up again? Is this planting a seed within my mind that I actually then will be more responsive to in the future, where I can be more conditioned? And I believe that the possibility for that exists, and certainly the media and various officials and business interests are very smart. We know that there have been times where we're not getting the full story, where we're getting only part of the story, and that there is a much larger amount of things. In other words, we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg, but there's something much bigger under there. And that's one of the strategies used frequently to drive fear, is that we're only just at the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the number of people that have been diagnosed and the people that are in the hospitals, and it's going to get considerably worse. Great strategy, because we certainly don't want to run into the iceberg like the Titanic did. And so again, that drives that fear. So I thought this would be helpful for us to have a conversation about fear, to understand what it does to the body, and just have that situational awareness, as I need to do as a pilot and as a healthcare provider, to assess on a moment-by-moment condition and situation, what should I be doing, how should I be looking at this, and how should I be addressing this particular problem. And I hope this is helpful for you. Have a great day.